I want to introduce you to someone in this segment. You've enjoyed his work for a long time. Jeff Bowers has been my friend for years. Jeff is one of those people in the world who love the NFL draft. He always has. Jeff and I started working together 9 years ago, Jeff?
Something like that.
6 years ago, Jeff started going to New York City with me for the draft. You see Jeff's work on our website, theticket.com. Go to the show blogs, go to Norm's blog, and you'll see already 10,000 or 15,000 words up there from Jeff, breaking down everything. Jeff goes to these star games. Jeff studies the combine. He is a draftnik in every sense of the word. And I've come to appreciate his work in background and breakdowns so much. And he'll be with me again in New York. And as I said, you can see his work on the website. And Jeff has, well, he's seen the star games, he's seen the combine, he's seen the ratings and the mock drafts, and here we go. All right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Many people are now focusing on Pittsburgh defensive tackle Aaron Donald as a perfect fit for the Cowboys. They think he'd make a perfect under tackle. His performances both on the field last season and at the combine were stellar. Do you think, like a lot of others, that Aaron Donald is a perfect fit?
Yes, absolutely. Aaron Donald's an interesting story because before, as we went into the draft season, he was, as you mentioned yesterday, he was kind of a late first, early second round kind of guy, a little bit undersized, but his performance at the Senior Bowl, his performance at the combine has absolutely rocketed him up the charts. He's my number one defensive tackle on the board. I've seen comparisons to Geno Atkins out of Cincinnati for a guy like that, and that's an absolute ideal fit for the three technique. The question is, now is he out of reach?
In fact, the question is now, has he been too good? Has he attracted too much attention? Might he go before the Cowboys?
And he very well may. It was interesting. The combine is always a fascinating study in people look for the wow factor, and people stop looking for just a good, solid player. They look for the guy who stands out, and Donald stood out. He stood out much more than Tim Jernigan, the Florida State defensive tackle, who was perceivably everyone's number one defensive tackle.
Or the Minnesota defensive tackle.
Right, or Rashid Hageman, or even Louis Nix. Mm-hmm. So if Donald has jumped to the top of many teams' boards like he has mine, he may very well be off the board by the time the Cowboys get to 16.
Let's take that situation where he's off the board. Is there anything that then comes close to jumping out for the Cowboys, regardless of position, that might be a falling player that makes sense for them?
Well, there's a couple of interesting guys there. I think Donald's got to be their primary target. I think they really want that to happen. I don't know that they would be willing to move up to get him, but I think that's got to be their target. We've heard reports that they're not as high on Tim Jernigan. They may not be as high on Clinton Dix. Now, by this time of year,
from Alabama.
Yeah, the safety from Alabama. By this time of year, everything's a smokescreen, so it's hard to tell anything there. But you're right. The safety from Alabama, Clinton Dix, is a possibility. The linebacker from Alabama, C.J. Mosley, that's a guy who could be an ideal fit. He could play at the middle linebacker and move Sean Lee outside. He could be your weak side linebacker and move Bruce Carter over to the strong side, which might be a better fit for him. So that's a definite possibility. The other guy that's interesting to me right in that spot is Coney Ealy. And Coney Ealy out of Missouri.
He's a Missouri player.
Right,
yeah.
The Missouri defensive end. What's interesting about him is, as a defensive end, he's not special. He doesn't have a lot of burst. He's not really a pass-rushing defensive end on the outside. But he's 6'4", 273. And the thought is, and the way he was really used at Missouri is, you add a few biscuits to him, put him inside, much like what Henry Melton was for the Bears. Convert him into defensive tackle, and his quickness and speed at that position makes him elite.
By the way, that would be the same position the Cowboys would target Aaron Donald for, that under tackle.
Exactly, the three technique.
All right, let's go to the second and third rounds. Let's leave the first round for what it is. You've identified players at need positions. Let's go quickly to second round.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've talked, the need positions there, obviously defensive tackle if Jason Hatcher walks. The big question there is DeMarcus Ware. Do they need a defensive end? That's going to be a big question if Anthony Spencer can be retained at a cheap price, that kind of idea. Other positions of need, possibly weak side linebacker, possibly free safety, as we mentioned, although I'm starting to get the feeling the Cowboys may not address safety in this draft. They may not be terribly interested.
Hoping that some combination of Wilcox, Heath, Johnson, or something.
Yeah, I mean, you've looked, they've invested a 4th-round pick in Johnson, a 3rd-round pick in Wilcox last year, so now it may be a thing where they say, we just got to do the best we can, which to me is a terrible way to build a team, but it is what it is. And then the other position there, possibly offensive guard. Addressing the offensive line is seemingly always a concern here. So when you look into the 2nd round, I went safeties first because I think the safety board at that point has tons of value. And, of course, Jimmy Ward, the Northern Illinois safety, he's probably gone by then. Right. He didn't run at the combine due to an injury, but that's a guy who's really rocketed up the board since the Senior Bowl. He's a guy who's probably early 2nd round. He probably doesn't get to 16. The guy that I love at that spot, though, there's actually 2, and they're both Florida State guys. Terrence Brooks and LaMarcus Joyner. Both of these guys are guys at Florida State who played this hybrid safety corner role. And it's something that's getting a lot more popular in the college ranks, and we saw it with Kenny Vaccaro last year with what the Saints did.
Yeah, teams are getting more and more attracted to cover safeties.
Exactly, and it's because you have these fast break offenses. You have, they're splitting out to 3 wide receivers. If you have a safety on the field who can be a nickel corner, that's invaluable.
Of the 2, do you prefer Joyner?
I like Joyner, but Joyner's small. Joyner's 5'8", 194.
Oh my, yes.
He's a little bitty guy, but he's got incredible ball skills. He is just absolutely amazing playmaker. Terrence Brooks had himself a fantastic combine. And, in fact, he ran a 4.4 240 and, with a 38-inch vertical. That'll get it done there. He's 5'11", 197. That's a guy who he played some corner at Florida State. He's played some free safety. He's only played really 1 year at free safety, but that's a guy who's a playmaker.
Jeff, before we leave the 2nd round, there's a name that I've mentioned all the way back into November that I like. He's a guard from Stanford named Yankee. A Stanford offensive lineman can play. Yeah. Has he gotten so good that he doesn't get to the Cowboys in the middle of the 2nd round?
Actually, the exact opposite is true.
Really?
He had a terrible combine.
Really?
He was unathletic. He looked very slow.
Really?
Wasn't as strong as thought. There was talk, and the last time we talked, there was talk he could be a late 1st round kind of guy. Now he will almost definitely be there. He could even fall into the 3rd round.
Okay, let's keep an eye on that guy. Let's go to the 2 lightning rods in this draft. Okay, quick thought. Jadeveon Clowney.
Clowney's interesting, and there's so much talk, both positive and negative about him, but the big thing that I have on Clowney is you just look at his raw numbers, and his raw numbers are identical to Javon Curse when he came out in the draft. I mean, identical. They're both
freaks.
Yeah, exactly. And the freak. That's exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about a guy who ran a 4.4 in the 40. He put up, not as great a bench, but he's got incredibly long arms. That bench bar has got to go a lot longer on a guy like that. I think Clowney is an absolute gem. And in interviews, he apparently was very upfront and very direct about some of the off-field issues, the speeding tickets and whatever. Apparently, he came to the table ready to address that, and that's big.
Given his incredible athletic skills, how does the one, though, translate that into so little impact on the field last year?
Well, last year, you got to look. I mean, teams were sending 2 and 3 guys at him. And, in fact, one of the other guys, his defensive tackle, another defensive tackle on South Carolina, Kelsey Quarles, it's hard for me to scout him because he's single-covered every play. And he was great last year. But it's hard for me to say, well, is that a result of the 4 guys that are blocking Clowney over here, or is that a result of him actually being a good player?
All right, let's go to Johnny Manziel. Within the last 24 hours, we've had Ron Jaworski say I wouldn't take him in the first 3 rounds, and Barry Switzer say he's a knucklehead, but he's the best quarterback I've seen.
Manziel is interesting, and I actually understand both of these thoughts. Because if you looked at it, if I just put it on the screen and you didn't know this guy from Adam and I took all the colors away from the screen and you watched him play, you'd say, he's pretty good. He shows flashes. He's a 2nd or 3rd round prospect. He needs a lot of work in reading defenses and doing a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's the it factor. And as I mentioned, at the combine, it's about wow factor. The thing about it for me is, as I look at his actual numbers, he wasn't outstanding. I mean, if he'd run a 4.5 40 or he had been just absolutely exceptional in any one category, then I would have said, okay, now I see it.
In
but he
speed,
wasn't.
though, isn't he more like Wes Welker, for instance, in these very quick, but
Right.
not a fast straight-line speed guy?
Absolutely. And so he's got the quicks, and that will help you, but I see there's going to be limitations there. And of course, everyone's going with the Russell Wilson factor, and people fail to realize Russell Wilson has limitations to his game.
Mm-hmm.
He won the Super Bowl because that's an incredible team around him.
And also because Pete Carroll devised an offense where he could get Wilson out of the pocket. He throws very well on the run.
Exactly.
Things like that. Is Manziel a top 5 player?
He will be. I don't think he should be, but he will be.
Will all 3 quarterbacks be gone in the first 8 picks?
I can't see any way that they wouldn't. Teddy Bridgewater, who chose not to throw, got a little bit of, in some of the interviews, the tag of being aloof, of being a little bit distant, maybe more of a quiet leader. Makes me kind of reminiscent of Geno Smith. So some teams could get a little leery of him, but his pro day is March 17th. I fully expect he will be fine there. And, of course, Blake Bortles, who did throw, who did step up. To me, it makes the most sense for him to be the number 1 pick to Houston because it fits their style. But the it factor is always prevalent on draft day.
I got a couple more quick questions for you as we approach break. Michael Sam has gotten a tremendous amount of publicity in America because he came straight forward, admitted he was gay, didn't want this story to leak out. Good college player.
Right. Very
good. Co-defensive player of the year in the SEC. How did he do in the combine?
Terrible. It was absolutely awful. And, to Michael Sam's credit, he came out and said, I want to be known as a football player, not the first gay football player, which is great. As a football player, he's undraftable.
Really?
He could absolutely.
His performance has dropped him that far?
He was small. He was slow. He didn't put up his bench press was very weak. To me, he's a really just a developmental player. Now, the question then will come, of course, if he goes completely undrafted, will people say, "Oh, that's because of this
or drops to the 7th round"? People say, "Well, I know why he dropped."
And then in the 7th round, when you're looking at a guy like that, 7th round guys are guys who maybe make the team, maybe make a practice squad. The media blitz that's coming with this guy. Do you take him in the 7th round?
So if he doesn't, on pure performance or combine, warrant 4th, 5th round, when he drops to the 7th, we've got that risk-reward table.
Exactly.
All right. Jeff, I know you've got other stuff. Let's save the sleepers for a few weeks on the road.
Absolutely.
We'll come back as we get through all this. We get into free agency. Jeff will be back. We'll do stuff leading up to the draft. Appreciate it, pal.
Thank you, sir.
That's Jeff Bowers with us on the draft. Let's roll the Norm's Junk, and it's almost sad to hear stories of what used to be a great player and his attempted comeback on the ticket.
Hey, tomorrow.